John Natkins and his daughter Marcia were feeding upon a mortal man, around 30, who had made advances towards John's 20-year-old daughter. So he didn't feel his usual remorse at draining the man dry. His daughter, of course, had no such qualms, never did. A vampire's bite freezes the victim, so they can watch, they can tear up. They can take 5 minutes to get out a single word or two. But little else. Marcia has discovered the ability to compel her victim to tell her the truth to whatever question she's asking. So after the initial bite, she would hold off until she asked them their PIN number to their bank card or where do they store their valuables in their house. And then she feeds. It is so difficult for them to talk that John does not like to listen to Marcia's inquisition. So after feeding on this rogue who had made advances on Marcia, they drained his ATM card. She walks up to the machine without a stitch on so no one could see her. So anyone could see her, but the cameras can't. It's as if she walks invisible. She steps out of the shadow, again fully clothed, and says, "Come, father, the taverns awaits." "No," he says, "I prefer to drink alone." "Fine, then, I will drink on my own." Her father knew that in a new town Marcia would be looking for someone she could turn into her servant by giving him a drop of her blood, and then continuing to keep them alive by continuing to give them a drop of her blood every few days, for as long as she needs them. Then when she stops providing her drop of life, the person will go to sleep and his heart will stop working. Back at their apartment, John, by now good and drunk, thinks back to when he had been turned. As the vampire fed upon him, a group of villagers had suddenly stepped out of the shadows and scared him away. They thought that he had been attacked by a beast, so they carried him home, and his daughter cared for him. She darkened the room for me when she saw me wraith from the light, and then at night I would feed upon the farm animals, and when she discovered how I fed, she did not turn away from me, but continued caring for me. And as thanks, when half the town had died from a sickness, before I let it take her, she pleaded with me to save her life, to save her. I knew what she wanted, to be made into one of the dead like me, but I struggled and anguished over it for days, as I watched her slipping away from me, and in the end I could not bear to lose her, so I turned my own daughter, not to save her, but simply because I could not lose her, or the burdens of guilt that I carry. The night her birth night, Marcia said to John, "Oh, Papa, you were never meant to be a vampire. But I was born for the night." In the wee hours, Marcia brought home a man named Dalton to be our servant during our stay in Lakeville. Lakeville is the town of the bottomless lake. John imagined the field of bodies that must be at that bottom of the bottomless lake. Marcia looked happy, and John thought back to a time that they had spent in Dallas, when Marcia had brought home a beautiful young woman to be their servant while they were in Dallas, and said, "Papa, you have been so lonely, so I brought you home a sweet." "For me?" I said, "Yes." So for our stay in Dallas, I was the happiest I had been in years. Texas, home of my happiest and worst memories, because of El Paso. One night, Marcia and her servant Tico, after we had fed, I went home and they went to a cantina in El Paso and got spotted by a nest of vampires. They fed on Tico and beat Marcia to a pulp, before jumping down into an open pit with her and chaining her by the neck to a metal hook. "Say hello to the day for us, puta." They knew that her maker would feel every punch that they had delivered to her, but they had no idea that her maker would be so close, especially with her slight old-world accent. They didn't really think they had anything to fear from her maker. When the first two jumped up from the day pit, John sliced off their heads with his machete. The other two, a man and a woman, were ready for him, but they were no match for him. He quickly dispatched them, and then he freed his daughter. John was beginning to think his decision of coming to Lakeville, because the pickings had been mighty slim. Finally, just before dawn, they saw a man walking into the shadows, so they followed him, but when they reached the man, he turned on them, cutting and slashing them with his claws. He had been transformed into a creature who was more than holding his own in this battle to the death. And as he was about to deliver the kill strike to Marcia, Dalton sacrificed himself, and John was able to plunge his machete into the beast, who fled. John carried Marcia to a house and broke in. He paused to jam a chair against the door, then swept upstairs, finding only two people sleeping. He bit both of them so that they laid there paralyzed while Marcia fed on the man until she had drained him dry, and then they both fed upon the woman. Then he carried Marcia down into the basement, where they waited for the night. That night they took their victim's car and then drove away as the flames began to engulf the home behind them. Then they quickly stopped at the house and packed their bags and drove towards new horizons.